So, this backstory may have nothing to do with my main story, or maybe it does. I'll tell it first anyway, in the interest of a good yarn. I grew up in a semi-detached house. I don't know if you guys in the US have this term, but it refers to houses built in pairs, as one building. They share a single wall in the center, but they're otherwise totally separate houses. Anyway, when my parents moved in, there was no fence between our house and the adjoining one in the back garden, or rather just a single wire. They hardly ever saw the neighbor to begin with. If he was in the garden when they went out, he would zip inside. He was something of a recluse in his early 50s. That was until one night, my father had a bonfire in the garden and noticed this guy in the shadows. He called to the guy, who came over and joined him at the fire. The chap's name was Jack, and he was a very interesting character. He worked on the railways. This was the early 80s. I don't recall exactly what, but it was something involving a lot of manual labor. He had built a machine workshop in his garden, all powered by a big coal-fueled steam boiler. I was too young to remember much, but apparently it was quite something to behold. He was a lonely single guy, but soon became a good friend of the family. We could just go over there and hang out, and run between the gardens as we pleased, because he enjoyed the company. He was a really nice guy. Anyway, roll on a few years, and there's a giant thunderstorm. The next morning, Jack was found on the pavement between his house and ours. He'd had a heart attack, and it looked like he was trying to get to our house for help. My parents realized after the fact that he'd been banging on the wall for help, but with the commotion of the storm, they had heard the noise, but not really put two and two together that the neighbor was trying to make contact. Shortly after, a new couple moved in. I was over there one evening, perhaps 2 or 3 years after that fateful night, babysitting their baby, who was upstairs in a cot, whilst I was downstairs watching MTV with the volume pretty low. As I'm sitting there, a tune begins to play, but it's not on the TV. It's to the right of me, and I swear it's the sound of tapping on the small wooden table that's a few feet from me. I look over to the noise, to the table, then sit there almost frozen as the notes play. Their cat is walking past, stops, and looks in the direction of the table too. This goes on for what feels like a long 15 seconds as I'm sat there, almost frozen. The hairs on the back of my neck are standing on end, and I have the feeling of someone walking over my grave. The feeling isn't terror, but let's say I'm on hyper alert. The feeling passes quickly, and I regain my composure. I go over to the table and tap my finger on it, and it definitely sounds just the same as the notes I was hearing. But I wasn't able to produce different notes by varying my tap, like the notes I had heard previously. It was sunset, not dark outside. I walked around the house and checked all the doors which were locked. The baby was still sound asleep in the cot. No way it could get out, and nobody else was in the house. I remain in the house until the parents return around midnight. I don't feel nervous, but all these years later, it's still an odd experience. I don't know how to pigeonhole. I don't read anything more into the feeling of walking on my grave than a biological response to something unexpected and alarming at the moment. A communication from a deceased neighbor beyond the grave? Well, it makes the story a little more interesting, I guess. I don't really read anything into that either. But it was an odd experience that remains vivid in my memory to this day.